Next thing to do is install the brackets for our CPU cooler, and to do this we're going to need to remove the stock clips. They're each held on with 2 screws. Then we can simply lift the clips off. We get these brackets with our CPU cooler, and you'll notice there's a little arrow here pointing towards the CPU, so we need to install the brackets the correct way round. And then we can use the 4 screws we've just removed to secure the brackets to the motherboard. If you've got an Intel motherboard, it doesn't come with a back plate, so you're going to need to use the back plate from the AIYO. And depending on the type of socket you have, depends where these little pins are going to need to be installed. So you can see here, for LGA 1700, you're going to want them in the outer setting. For LGA 1200, it's on the inner setting. So if I turn it over, you'll see what I mean. So these are the little pins, and they can go in one of 2 positions. We can push them in towards the middle for LGA 1200, but we've got an LGA 1700 socket, so we're going to make sure they're all pulled to their outer setting. Now there is some double-sided adhesive here, so you would pull the little bit of paper off before sticking this on, and that's going to help hold the back plate in place. This is just a temporary install for me, so I'm not going to pull it off just yet. So the pin's all in their outer setting. All we need to do is line it up with the motherboard, and then the back plate is going to simply fall into place. And then we just need to screw one of these standoffs onto each corner. So just before we install our fans on the radiator, we're going to have to pick the fan setting that we want them to run in. So you can see here we've got advanced, performance and hybrid, and there's 3 different fan speeds, which will give you 3 different levels of performance, but importantly 3 different noise levels. The hybrid is the lowest cooling potential, but also the quietest. So whenever your CPU is at a low temperature, the fans will actually stop spinning. The performance is somewhere in the middle, whereas the advanced, the fans will run at the faster speed, which will bring more noise. So I'm happy with them in the performance setting. If you do want to adjust it, so you can see there's a little lever here, and this is what is actually going to adjust the fan speeds. So if we pull the lever this way, that's it moved over towards advanced, where the fans will run at the fastest speed, but bring the most noise. Push it all the way over 2 settings this way to hybrid. It's going to run the slowest, but also give us the lowest noise. And the one I'm going to go for is the one in the middle, which is performance. So I'm going to leave all the fans set to performance. So in terms of installing the fans in the radiator, you'll notice we've got cables coming from one side of the fans, and we're actually going to daisy chain all the fans together. So we are going to want to have this cable at the back of the case and the good side of the fans on at the front. So I've already sized this up in the case. This is going to be the back, so I'm going to turn the fans around and set them on the radiator this way. So in terms of installing the fans to the radiator, the AIYO comes with 2 long sets of screws. We've got 39mm long screws and 36mm long screws, and it's the 36mm ones, the slightly shorter of the longer screws, that we're going to want to use. These 39mm screws are only if you're installing the Phanteks halos on top of the fans, and they're going to have the extra length to go through the halos and the fans and then into the radiator. We're going to want to use the 36mm screws, because if we try and install these longer ones, they may actually damage the radiator. Then we're going to want to daisy chain the fans together, so we can just plug the PWM connectors into the splitter cable from the next fan. And obviously you'll notice this cable on this end is a little bit short, but Phanteks do include this extension cable. So it's just a matter of plugging it into here. There we go. And then we're going to have a slightly longer cable, which we're going to be able to plug into our CPU fan header. So next thing to do is take a look at the cables coming from our pump, and we've got another 4-pin PWM connector, and this is going to go into our pump header on the motherboard. Now if you do only have one CPU fan header, Phanteks have got you covered. They include this double splitter cable. So we've got a 4-pin PWM connector on this end and 2 adapters on this end. So what you would do is plug this cable from the pump into here, and also the long cable coming from your fans into here, leaving you one 4-pin PWM connector to plug into the CPU fan header on your motherboard. We've actually got 3 CPU fan headers on our motherboard, so we're going to be fine plugging the cables in separately, which is going to allow us to control our pump and also the fans on the radiator separately. So in terms of ARGB, also coming from the pump, we've got a standard Phanteks connector. So because we're using a Phanteks case with a built-in controller, we're going to be able to plug this directly into our controller. And one of the nice things as well, we've got a little splitter here, so you plug this into a connector, and you've got another connector here you can daisy chain something into. So if you're using a different case that doesn't have one of these connectors on it, Phanteks again have thought about this, and they include this adapter cable. So it would just be a matter of plugging into it, and on the other end of the cable we've got a standard 3-pin 5V ARGB connector, and that would go into the ARGB header on your motherboard. And again, Phanteks have been really kind to you. We've got another splitter cable with a 3-pin 5V ARGB connector on it, allowing you to plug another ARGB device into it. So as I've mentioned, our case has a nice connector on it on the controller, so I'm just going to plug this directly into it rather than using our motherboard at all. We can then set our AIYO into place at the top of the case, and then we're going to secure it into place with 12 of the short radiator screws. Just before we install the pump to the motherboard, I want to point out that there's two different nuts that come with the AIYO. The one with the little line in the middle is the one we're going to want to use for this motherboard, and it's used for LGA 1700 and AM5. The one that doesn't have the little line in the middle is for AM4 and LGA 1200. So it's this one that we're going to want to use. Our pump has thermal paste pre-applied, but if you're installing it for a second time, it's good to see that Phanteks includes some additional thermal paste. Okay, so we can remove the plastic protection from the back of the AIYO, and we're going to take care not to damage the pre-applied thermal paste. Then we can take our AIYO and line it up with the bracket beneath. Apply a little bit of pressure to hold it in place, and then we're going to need to get a thumb screw onto each corner. Okay, then we're just going to tighten each of the thumb screws up in turn. So next thing to do is get our cables plugged in. So our ARGB cable, I'm just going to route through to the back of the case. And our pump PWM cable, again, I'm going to route up towards the top of the case. And our pump header is this one at the top. There's 3 CPU fan headers at the top, and it's the one towards the right that we're going to want to plug it into. And then we can just tuck the excess cable down and out of the way. Coming from the fans and the radiator, we've got another PWM connector, and it's going to go into our CPU fan header, which is the header toward the left-hand side at the top of the motherboard. So we can get it plugged in, and then we can go ahead and route all the excess cable through to the back. Then at the back of the case, we can plug the ARGB cable coming from the pump into the ARGB cable coming from our controller. And we've got another daisy chainable connector we're going to be able to plug our fans into later on. And then we've got some plastic protection on the pump we can remove. So another thing we get with the AIYO is these tubes organizer clips, and there's 3 of them that come with the AIYO. So just a matter of pushing them over the tubes, and that will help keep the tubes together and keep them organized.